Hi guys, welcome to today's lesson. Today we are studying flatworms. Flatworms belong to the phylum Platyhelminthes. Um, and as you can tell, these are different types of flatworms. And we're going to be looking at roundworms today also. Flatworms are very different than roundworms. Obviously, as you can tell, they're flat. And we're going to talk a little bit about their makeup and their characteristics. So flatworms belong to so they have tissues and they have bilateral symmetry. And as you can tell, all the organisms that we're going to be looking at from here on out have bilateral symmetry. They belong to the area of acoelomates, so they do not have a cavity in an internal cavity. And so if when you remember that, that means that there's no space for them to develop organs. So when they have the space where they do the digestive system, and then they have the endoderm, the mesoderm, and the ectoderm all together. Um, Flatworms have a very interesting structure. So they have, um, as you can see, they have eyes in the front of their heads. They have cephalization, so they develop a small nervous system. Here you can see the clusters that surround the eyes, and you can see that this nervous system travels all the way down their body. They also are, they're the most primitive organisms to have cephalization. They have is the first organism to have organs. So you notice here that they have a gastrovascular cavity where they and their mouth is actually halfway through their body, where they absorb all their nutrients through this cavity, through this mouth, and then the gastrovascular cavity allows that food to be transported around the organism. I don't know if you notice here, there's two sides this cavity stems, but only one on the top, right? Remember, this is called the anterior, where the head is, and this is called the posterior. So in the interior, you could have the eyes and the head, but the mouth is in the posterior side of the flatworm. They are also flat shaped, and so notice that outside of their nervous clusters and their mouth, they don't have any other organs. So what that means is when they don't have, for example, a respiratory system. So in order for them to absorb oxygen, they use diffusion. And so their flatness allows them to have very few cells and allows those cells to be able to diffuse any oxygen that is around and release carbon dioxide through their cells. So even though they are very simple, they are much more complex. So what I need you to get out of this is that we're building on complexity here. We now have a nervous system, or nervous tissue, I should say, is not a system, but we developed tissues that work together to build an organ, and that organ is this gastrovascular cavity that allows this organism to process any nutrients. So the so they don't need respiratory system because of how the small their shape is. They also have cilia around them, and they contract their muscles to be able to move and wiggle, and we're going to talk about how how that happens. They're mostly aquatic, so these are found mostly in water, and many of them are parasites. And here is an example of the bilateral symmetry. I split this and I get two even parts, but if I were to split the flatworm like this, I would get different sides. Okay, we're gonna watch this video on flatworm reproduction. So they are very cool. They are hermaphrodites, but they can also, they're very good at fragmentation. So this video is about how they behave in asexual reproduction and fragmentation. Oh, and I'm gonna speed this up so that you guys can see it happen faster. Oh, okay. Oh. Okay, I was able to make it work. So here you notice that the worm was actually cut in half, and what you're gonna see is how the tail is gonna give you a day per day development of regeneration after amputation. And where you're gonna see is right now the tail is growing the top of the worm. And it took about 7 days, 4 days, the head is already taking shape. And in about a week, the worm has an identical head. And now you're gonna see what happens to the amputated head. And again, after about 7 days, the head has now developed a complete tail. And you have two identical organisms. Okay, so okay, so the last thing that I wanted to talk to you about is that flatworms. One type of flatworms that you might have heard about are called they're called tapeworms, and tapeworms are found in animals or human, and all animals including humans. Here is a tapeworm that a man pooped out that it was like 30 feet long. But tapeworms are very dangerous for dogs, and they actually, the larvae settle in the fleas, and as the fleas mature, the basically the dog that has fleas ends up with tapeworms. Okay, our next section is on phylum Nematoda, and these are roundworms. So roundworms are now in our next section of diversity that you see on our here on our cladogram. So they have a body cavity, sort of, right? They're pseudocoelms. And remember that that means that the cavity is not properly developed. So there's a little bit more space in between the mesoderm and the endoderm, but it's not fully. So they have a digestive tract, and it surrounds it by the endoderm. So the roundworms, one of the big evolutionary steps for the roundworms is how its body structure now goes from mouth to anus. So now there are two cavities that were developed with one digestive tract. What does one-way digestive tract mean? It means that stuff goes into the mouth and exits out the anus, as opposed to in the previous organisms that we've seen, the materials have to be released out through the place it came in, the mouth. And so remember, for example, for the cnidarians and the flatworms, that there's only one. The flatworm had a mouth here, and everything came in and out of the mouth or through the cells. Well, this roundworm is more complex. As you notice, it has a few more organs. It has a pharynx. It has actually an intestine. And it has the ovaries and the reproductive pores here in between the pseudocoelom. So roundworms are hydrostatic, have a hydrostatic skeleton, and that means that they are really cool. They are able to use water to create pressure in between their skeleton and their ectoderm, that allows, like a water balloon, when you fill it, it puts pressure on the walls. So the liquid, the hydrostatic, the water that comes in, puts pressures on the ectoderm and allows the worm to push through the walls, giving it this very interesting wiggling ability to be able to move. Because, and this is not the organism that has hydrostatic skeleton. Other organisms that we've previously seen do too, but this is their major way of movement. Roundworms can be found in plants and in dirt, so they're mostly terrestrial. They do live on diverse habitats, and they're very common in gardens. Usually if you take a shovel and you shovel an amount of dirt, you will find about 1 million roundworms. But here is a plant that was attacked by an actual parasitic roundworm. So this potato plant here got decimated by these roundworms. So generally, they're really good for the environment. They help break down soil materials. Roundworms also are harmful to pets. And so if your dog had worms, these are the worms that they have to remove. They get medication to remove the worms. And they are considered model organisms used by scientists because they are obviously multicellular. So this is one of the organisms that is used for studies, but they're a lot smaller than human cells. Humans have about 37 trillion cells. They have less than 1,000. So they're, and they can grow very fast. They can react very fast. You can get genetic information. All the data that you can collect can happen very quickly because they're smaller, yet they're multicellular, and they have some of the traits similar to humans. So some of the studies that they use these organisms for are aging and genetics. And I will leave you with this SpongeBob.
Still hungry. Still hungry. Still hungry. Still hungry. Still hungry. Oh, dang nematodes.
All right, guys, have a wonderful day. Let me know if you need anything.